Well, if you follow the news closely, now recently Donald Trump actually named one of the days is called Liberation Day. Now, what happened on that day was rather crucial, but it was rather alarming to the international community. When we look at the geopolitical change, there's no surprise that someone like Donald Trump is very much interested to build the connection between geopolitical shift and the economic agenda. And that's right. So that's why recently, under the Trump administration, Donald Trump announced more tariffs for more countries, and all the way from China and to the countries in Southeast Asia, for example, and Vietnam. Now, during one interview, according to the Vice President J.D. Vance, he called it, and I quote, Trump administration's strategy is to rearrange trade and tariff policy to bring jobs back to the U.S., end quote. How should we understand that today? For example, a country such as Vietnam, how does the country take the signal well when we look at this trade policy or this continuation of the tariffs upon the country? And what does that say about the foreign policy under Donald Trump? And last but not least, Chinese leader is expected to also visit Vietnam in mid-April. Will the trip under the Chinese leader make a new turn between China and Vietnam? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who's Dr. Hong Nguyen at this moment. And Dr. Hai, it's a scholar at the American University, and also he's currently a senior lecturer of politics, social change, and international relations in the College of Arts and Science at Vinh University in Vietnam. He's a specialist and has published on Vietnamese politics and foreign relations, international relations in Southeast Asia. Well, Dr. Hai, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thank you, Will. My pleasure.
Well, Dr. Hai, again, as I mentioned in the intro, Trump called it the Liberation Day. But actually, when we look at what happened on that day, it wasn't really exciting news for many countries, and for example, China and Vietnam. Now, I want to read something to you, and I want to get your a reaction to this. Again, based on what I said and initially, that the current Vice President J.D. Vance proclaimed that Trump administration's strategy is to rearrange trade and tariff policy to bring more jobs back to the U.S. Dr. Hai, from your perspective, why do you think Trump, right now, it's so passionate about placing more tariffs upon different countries, and again, such as China, such as Vietnam, and how much do we believe that this is such a move that 100% targeting bringing jobs back to the U.S. for Americans? Your thoughts?
Thank you, Will, which is a very interesting question. I think, as President Trump said, he has been a tariff man for 40 years, for decades, not just now, or not just over the past 8 years. So I think for him, in his eye and in his thinking, that the U.S. has been losing jobs to foreign countries for decades, and that's why he just want to take the job back for American workers. However, I think it is purely an ideas or a size of nationalisms, and even we can say is purely a popularism, because Donald Trump really wanted to get the vote from workers, and actually there are different views on Trump's tariffs policy. One view is that, well, he's doing what he promised during his campaign. So, however, I think he might forget how the United States emerged to be a superpower, a power in the world. To be a power in the world, the United States has to, reach out to the world and has for many years advocated for globalizations and internationalizations, and that's how the United States to be a superpower and a world leaders. And it's also true in a sense that the United States becomes a superpower thanks to the internationalized or liberalization of trade um, and investment. So if he really want to take a job back to the United States for Americans, the workers, I think it's really a size of isolationisms. I think it's completely, go against the ideas of liberalization and internationalization. So, we will see how it will be. But of course, we can see immediately that the American consumers and workers already pay the price for it. The reaction in the stock market already very negative in not only in the United States but of course around the world. So I think at the moment, I think Trump administration have very simple thinking. The simple thinking is that they just want to get the job back, but they also have the simple thinking of how the United States has become a superpower, a world leaders. It's not simple in a way that if you just get the job back, close the door, and people still respect you and people still consider you as the world leader. So I think they will rethink it. They will, uh, need to reassess the impact of their policy.
Dr. Hai, I agree with you 100%. It's one thing that portray oneself as the hero for the country. Again, during the campaign season, one of the critical aspect that got Donald Trump elected, it was the economy. I mean, again, the economic agenda was so critical to American voters. But there's something else happened is when we look at this internationalism or the international community. Now, again, I want to continue our conversation. As soon as the announcement was made, a senior White House official told the reporters, because mainly there were many countries on the list, as I mentioned before, not only China, but also we're seeing Vietnam and Cambodia. And this is the same thing that the senior White House official answered the question, and I quote, "For every dollar that we sell to Vietnam, they sell us at $39. And the reason why Vietnam sells us anything at all is because China has turned Vietnam into the most important transshipment hub that communist China uses to evade our tariffs." So in other words, this senior official believe that buildings in Vietnam that may look like manufacturing facilities are actually warehouses in which Chinese product are rebranded Vietnamese and sent to the US. Dr. Hai, you are a political scientist. You're the expert. Why do you think, let me rephrase that question, how much do you think that such statement can actually jeopardize the relationship between Vietnam and America at this moment? I mean, again, I'm not ready to bring China into a conversation yet, but at this moment, it looks like the White House, or it looks like the Trump administration is trying to say that Vietnam is not being authentic when it comes to the economy. Vietnam is not being transparent when it comes to economic relationship. Again, the question back to you, Dr. Hai, what do you say to that? And why do you think the Trump administration officials came up with such a strong claim?
Well, I think this question is debatable, Will, because Now, let me address to the questions
Mm,
on the way like this one. Okay, so since the first Trump administration, they already launched the trade war
mm,
with China, right? And of course, the trade was prompted a decoupling movement of Western companies, including American companies.
mm,
So they had to look for new destination for manufacturing, right? And that's and of course they turned into many other countries, including Vietnam. So many American companies, Western companies, have shifted their production lines
mm,
to Vietnam's. So so that's why once they moved to Vietnam, of course, given the fact that they originally operating in China, that means they continue using the materials, uh, um, imported from China for their production. And of course, on the other hand, in Vietnam, Vietnam also have Vietnamese companies. So in terms of the products exported from Vietnam, we need to be, very objective in the sense that there's also, export by Western companies, which previously moved from China to Vietnam. And of course, on the other hand, Vietnam also have its own domestic companies um, um, exporting products to the United States. So that said, is not purely the officers purely claim that this is a or blames 100% on Vietnam is unfair, I would say.
mm,
Um, and on the other hand, in fact, the tariff imposed on Vietnam's actually, damaging or causing damage to American and Western companies, including American allies companies. Um, so that is one thing I just want to make it clear. And I think the United States should understand that. And the other one, as you mentioned, the relationship between Vietnam and the United States these days, and to talk about transparency, I think it's fair to say that, well, at the moment, the relationship between Vietnam and the US at the highest level ever. Of course, Vietnam and the US now are comprehensive strategic partnership, um, and of course, political trust between the two countries has been improved. I have been studying trust between Vietnam and the US. And of course, I completely agree with the former ambassador to Vietnam, and also the former assistant to Secretary of the United States, Daniel Christian Brink, when he was on an interview in Vietnam a few days ago. Um, I counted in the interviews that he mentioned not less than 3 times the
mm,
word trust. More particularly, he emphasized that the trust between Vietnam and the US now is very high. So I think there's no doubt that the two countries have very high trust at the moment, and the
mm,
relationship is very good at the moment. And of course, Vietnam, own way, is transparent in the relationship between China's and between Vietnam and the U.S. And of course, Vietnamese leaders has emphasized many times that economics and trade relationship are the pillars of the U.S. and Vietnam U.S. Relationship. So I think uh, this is very important, and Vietnam completely understands that. And of course, more particularly in the context that Vietnam understands that the US also chase the origin of the materials used for the exports. So that's why I think Vietnam has been very transparent in a sense that it encourages the Vietnamese businesses and companies to, um, uh, you know, um, make it clear the origins of the materials used as products exported to United States.
Dr. Hai, let's bring China into our conversation. Again, as I mentioned in the intro, Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to visit the nation of Vietnam in mid-April, and again, the information just came in as we before we started our conversation. Now, one of the critical goals for China or for the Chinese leader is, and I quote, seeking to capitalize on the current regional unease about the direction of U.S. policy in the region. Now, we know that this is not going to be an easy conversation between Vietnam and China when we talk about the US. And given the fact that tension between US and China, it's rather high at this moment, especially after this announcement of the tariffs. Now, Dr. Hai, from your perspective, how crucial it is today, or how crucial it is for Vietnam to welcome the Chinese leader this time in the midst of the whole tariffs and also the political attention. And also from your perspective, since you use the word trust, I dare to ask the question, how much does the trust have between between China and Vietnam at this moment, and also based on what ground? Your thoughts?
Well, I think the visits by Chinese President Xi Jinping to Vietnam has been planned, have been discussed between the two sides for months. Likewise, Vietnam has prepared for the tariff imposed by the Trump administration also for months, because we all know, President Trump's going to do as he declared during his campaign, and also from the very first day of his second administration. So I think it's not something like a rhetoric respond to the Trump administration tariff policy or imposition reciprocal tariff. What I mean is that everything's and such high visits by Xi Jinping to Vietnam has been prepared and discussed for months. So it's not something that Vietnam, welcomes Xi Jinping visits to Vietnam in a way to respond to the Trump administration's tariff. Is that the first thing we need to be very clear about that. And of course, I think in a sense that everyone have to think of is national interest, right? Is not President Trump also think of and what he's doing is for American national interests. And look at Europe. Look at what French President Macron declared yesterday. He said, well, and he called on the stop of making investment in the United States. And of course, many other countries also thinking of some kind of imposing a tax in response to President Trump's. Now, I think in that sense, everyone have to think of its own interest, national interest, and of course they have to think of the diversifications of or diversifying the market in order to export its products. And I think in a sense that if one country getting closer or having a relationship with another countries in order to diversify its market is natural, right? So and again, of course, China has its own strategy to diversify its market,
Mm,
to look for different sources, different markets, and Vietnam too. And Vietnam, of course, also want to diversify its market and vice versa. So it's a kind of a mutual interest between China and Vietnam if they, promote or enhance trade or economic investment. Not alone in the fact that, as I said before, these visits by Xi Jinping to Vietnam has been planned for months. So now in terms of trust, as we have heard, many times. And of course, as we have heard from leaders from both countries, that political trust between Vietnam and China um, uh, um, is very high at the moment. And of course, we can see that particularly from 2023 when Xi Jinping visited Vietnam and the two countries used a new terms that they needed to relocate or reshape the relationship between Vietnam and China. And of course, the two countries already agreed to join what they call the communities of safe future carry forward strategic significance. So I think now that is the trust between the two countries spoken by leaders of the two countries. But on the other hand, we have to acknowledge the fact that Vietnam and China still have the dispute in the South China Sea, um, and um, and that Vietnam, China is still occupying the Paracel Islands that they
mm,
use force to take over from Vietnam in 1974, and also the lands in the Spratly Islands in 1988. So that's the fact. And of course, the relationship between Vietnam and China is always, on the one hand, characterized by collaborations and struggle.
mm. Dr. Hai, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the last question. I'm very glad that you touch on the South China Sea issue. Again, experts believe that this time the Chinese leader will use the opportunity of to depict China as a steadfast and reliable partner. But again, Dr. Hai, we know that the issue with South China Sea has been one of the most debatable and also disputable issues, not just only for Vietnam, but also for Malaysia and also for the Philippines. I mean, again, matters to a lot of countries in Southeast Asia. But I think at the end of the day, what we are very much interested in knowing or getting your information is how do you think that the Chinese leader will continue to display China as a reliable partner in the midst of the disputable territorial issues? Or how do you think China should position itself in order to maintain this positive engagement with Vietnam while we're seeing this disconnection or seeing this tension between US and China at this moment? Your final thoughts.
Well, of course, I think China's for decades has taken the bilateral approach in dealing with the disputes in the South China Sea. So I think with Vietnam, of course, as I mentioned in my answers previously, that the trust and the relationship between Vietnam and China is now is very high and very good at the moment, and so that's why I think and the two countries and leaders of Vietnam and China understand that at these very critical times, that they need to maintain good relationship between the two countries, and of course they need to address the dispute in the South China Sea in a ways that will not affect the relationship between Vietnam and China at the moment. And I think that is also in the context of changing geopolitical landscapes in the Indo-Pacific and in the South China Sea, and it also linked with the increased status of Vietnam's in the Indo-Pacific and in Southeast Asia in general. And I think that is important for both countries to deal with the disputes in the China Sea in a peaceful way and in a mutual respect. And of course, as I said, Vietnam in one or another way that they continue to, of course, vow to struggles for the lands lost to China's, or more precisely taken forcibly by Chinese in the 1970 and 1988. But on the other hand, Vietnam also see that at the moment it needs a peaceful environment for its development in decades to come. So I think both countries realize that at the moment it is important for both countries to maintain a peaceful relationship, good relationship, and strategic relationship in order to achieve their development goals. So I think now China should not misunderstand the increase and strategic relationship between Vietnam and the United States. Vietnam's upgraded its relationship with the United States. It does not mean that Vietnam will take side with the United States against China. And of course, there's also a message to our American friends too. Vietnam welcomes Xi Jinping to Hanoi or improve its relationship with China. Does not mean Vietnam will take side with China against the United States. Vietnam really want to have a peaceful environment, has really want to to have good relationship with both China and the United States in order to improve its defense capability, in order to improve its synergy and strength to defend by itself. Vietnam will not rely on one or another to go against another. So that is the policy that Vietnam stated clearly in its defense white paper and defense policy. So I think in the context, we need to understand Vietnam policies and foreign relations in that way that, well, Vietnam want to have good relationship with all countries in order to achieve and in order its developmental goals. And also to have a peaceful environment.
Well, I think, Dr. Hai, at this moment, just echo what you said, especially the last portion of your sentence, is a peaceful development. And we know that today the stakes are rather high when we look at the geopolitical change, and either that the Chinese leader is going to send a strong signal to Vietnam and also to the countries in Southeast Asia, And also, on the other hand, I'm sure that Donald Trump or Trump administration will also be notified regarding this upcoming trip for Chinese leader. But again, at the end of the day, all we want is a peaceful development. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to speak to Dr. Hong Nguyen. Again, Dr. Hai, it's a Fulbright scholar at the American University at this moment. And also, he's a lecturer of politics, social change, and international relationship scholar. And we strongly encourage everyone go online, connect with Dr. Hai. Again, Dr. Hai, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. We'd love to have you back on the show. I promise you, this won't be the last time we talk about Vietnam, US, and China. As long as Donald Trump is in the White House, more shocking news is going to come out to surprise the entire world. So thank you so much for doing this.